They called me a doddering old fool and tried to steal my home, the sacred ground where I still heard my wife's laughter in the halls. They thought my mind was a flickering ember, easy to snuff out. They forgot I spent 40 years as the city's fire chief. I didn't just fight fires. I understood them. I knew how to find their source, how they spread, and precisely how to starve them of oxygen. Their greed was a wildfire, and I was about to create the perfect firebreak. It began, as most betrayals do, with a smile. My daughter Chloe and her husband Marco stood in my kitchen, a cavern of memories that smelled of Eleanor's lemon pound cake and my strong black coffee. They brought a guest, a woman with a predatory glint in her eyes. They introduced as Dr. Albright, a geriatric care specialist. They said she was just here to chat, to see how I was coping. The condescension in Chloe's voice was a physical thing, a thick, cloying smoke that filled the room. I've been coping just fine for 5 years, I told them, pouring 3 cups of coffee I knew only I would drink. The house is big, Dad, Marco chimed in, his voice oozing a synthetic sympathy that never reached his eyes. Too big for one person. All the stairs, the upkeep. We worry you'll fall, that you'll leave the stove on. He gestured around the kitchen, my kitchen, as if it were a museum exhibit of my decay. It was a well-rehearsed performance, designed to paint me as a liability in my own life. The specialist asked me simple questions, the date, the Prime Minister's name, to count backward from 100 by sevens. I played along, my mind a steel trap behind a placid expression. I could see the endgame taking shape. They weren't worried about my health. They were worried about their access to my wealth. Their trendy wellness startup, a bottomless pit they threw my money into, was failing. I knew it, and they knew I knew it. This was their desperate, final gambit. Then Chloe slid a sheaf of papers across the oak table Eleanor and I had refinished ourselves. It's a durable power of attorney, Dad. It just lets us help you manage things. Pay your bills, make decisions about the property. It's for your own good. Her voice was gentle, the tone you'd use on a frightened child, so we can sell the house and move you somewhere more appropriate. Secure. That was the word she used. Secure. Like a prison, they wanted to cage me so they could sell my world for parts. I looked at the documents. I looked at my daughter's face, a stranger's face wearing a mask of concern. I saw Margot behind her, a vulture waiting for the lion to die. The disrespect was a physical blow, worse than any flame. They weren't just trying to take my house. They were trying to erase me, to declare my life, my competence, my very existence, over. They wanted to sign my name on the death certificate of my own autonomy. Something cold and hard settled in my chest, extinguishing the hot flash of rage. It was the calm that always came at the heart of a 5-alarm fire. Panic is an accelerant. It only makes things worse. I looked from Chloe to Marco, and for the first time in an hour, I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the thin, sharp smile of a man who sees the entire board. I saw their plan, and in that instant, I saw my own countermove with perfect, crystalline clarity. "That's very thoughtful of you both," I said, my voice steady. "Let me think on it." I pushed the papers back toward them. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some gardening to do." The sudden dismissal caught them off guard. Their rehearsed arguments and emotional appeals were useless. They stammered, their masks slipping, revealing the raw frustration underneath. I simply stood up, walked to the back door, and left them sitting in my kitchen, their poison rendered inert. I watched them leave from the garden, their luxury electric SUV whispering down the driveway like the thief it was. Only when they were gone did I allow myself to lean against the old oak tree Eleanor and I had planted. I looked at her picture on the mantel through the window. "Forgive me, Ellie," I whispered. "Forgive me for what I'm about to do, but this house is our last sanctuary. I will not let them desecrate it." Her smiling face in the silver frame was my moral compass, and the needle was pointing toward war. I didn't storm or rage. I went to my study, a room filled with 4 decades of service awards, leather-bound fire investigation manuals, and city planning documents. My mind, the one they deem failing, began to work with the methodical precision of a blueprint. Their weakness was their lifestyle, their arrogance was their fuel, and their Achilles' heel was the illegally renovated warehouse loft they called home, the one they bought after I gave them a foolishly generous gift to start their business. I had only been there once. They'd bragged about the renovation, how they'd saved a fortune by hiring a trendy designer who worked under the table. I remembered the details with a fire chief's eye for hazards. The exposed, century-old brickwork, beautiful, but likely hiding knob and tube wiring. The soaring 20-foot ceilings with a sleeping loft that had only one narrow, stylish spiral staircase for an exit. A classic fire trap, elegant and deadly. I pulled out the city's building and fire code regulations, books I knew, as well as the lines on my own hands. I spent hours cross-referencing the loft's zoning designation against residential conversion requirements, egress, sprinkler systems, fire separation walls, electrical load capacity. With every page, their smug, entitled faces sharpened in my mind. They had built their chic lifestyle on a foundation of code violations, and I was about to kick it out from under them. The next morning, I made a call. The phone was answered on the second ring. Chief Inspector Frank Miller's office. I smiled. Frank Miller. I remembered him as a rookie, eager and sharp, a kid I took under my wing. A kid whose family I personally pulled from a tenement fire 2 decades ago. Frank, it's Arthur Penson. There was a pause on the other end. Then a voice filled with genuine warmth and respect. Chief Penson, it's an honor, sir. How are you? We exchanged pleasantries, the dance of old colleagues. Then I got to the point. Frank, I need some information off the record. I'm looking at the old textile warehouse conversion on Elm Street, Unit 4B. I'm curious if a full residential occupancy permit was ever issued after the renovation. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. He knew my reputation. I never made idle inquiries. He asked for 10 minutes and called me back in 5. The news was better, and worse, than I had imagined. An initial construction permit was pulled, Frank said, his voice now tight with professional concern. But the final inspection was never completed. They withdrew the application. As far as the city is concerned, that unit is zoned for commercial art studio use only. Legally, no one should be living there, especially with the unverified electrical and structural changes they made. They were not just violating code, they were illegally occupying the space. I see, I said, my voice a model of calm. Thank you, Frank. That's all I needed. Chief, he interrupted, if there's something going on, an anonymous tip about unsafe living conditions would have to be investigated. Immediately, it would be my duty. The unspoken message was clear. He was giving me the weapon and telling me how to load it. I made the anonymous call 10 minutes later from a payphone downtown, my voice disguised with a gravelly affectation. The following days were a quiet storm. Chloe and Marco, oblivious to the bureaucratic gears grinding into motion against them, escalated their campaign. Concerned texts became accusatory phone calls. They told my neighbors I was wandering, that I was forgetting things. Mrs. Gable next door told me they asked if I'd left the sprinklers on all night again. I hadn't used the sprinklers in a month. They were poisoning the well, building their false narrative brick by brick. Then the official envelope arrived, a petition for a competency hearing filed with the county. Attached was a signed affidavit from their pet specialist, Dr. Albright, detailing my supposed cognitive decline. They cited my refusal to sign the power of attorney as proof of my irrationality. They were twisting my defiance into a symptom of the very disease they invented. The hearing was set for 2 weeks' time. It was their checkmate move, or so they thought. Instead of fear, I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was the final piece of my plan falling into place. Their legal attack gave me the perfect stage for my counteroffensive. A formal hearing, on the record, where facts, not manufactured concern, would rule the day. I took the documents and filed them neatly in a folder labeled The Reckoning. They had chosen the battlefield. I would choose the weapons. My next move was subtle. I knew Chloe monitored my credit card statements. She'd once called to question a large $50 purchase at the hardware store. So, I paid cash for a new smoke detector. Not just any smoke detector. It was a high-end model, the kind used in sensitive commercial applications. It was identical to the one already in my kitchen, but this version had a hidden feature: a motion-activated, high-fidelity audio recorder with a tiny pinhole lens. Installing it was simple. As a fire chief, I knew that proper placement was crucial for safety. It was perfectly legal, fully to code, and placed in the ideal spot to protect my home. That spot also happened to have a clear, unobstructed view of the kitchen table where all important family conversations took place. It was a safety device, in every sense of the word. It would protect me from fire, and it would protect me from predators. Then I made a call to my grandson, Leo. He was only 10, a sweet kid caught in the middle of his parents' toxicity. "Can you come over, Leo? I need your help with my new computer tablet." It was a pretense, but a necessary one. I needed to see him, to remind myself who the real victim in all of this was. He arrived an hour later, dropped off by a rideshare. Chloe and Marco were too busy plotting my demise to be bothered with parenting. We didn't talk about his parents. We spent the afternoon setting up the tablet, his small fingers flying across the screen. I taught him how to play chess, and he thrashed me twice. He had a quick, analytical mind. Seeing him, so full of life and untainted potential, solidified my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for a house. I was fighting for the chance to be a grandfather to this boy, free from the manipulative poison of his parents. A few days later, my daughter called. Her voice was sharp, panicked. "Dad, did you do something? There's a notice on our door from the city. A building inspector is coming tomorrow. An emergency audit. Do you know anything about this?" The bait was taken. I feigned ignorance, a confused old man. "An inspector? Goodness, I hope everything is all right. Are you sure you paid your taxes, dear?" Her frustration was a delicious symphony in my ear. She had no idea the call was coming from inside the house, so to speak. The next day, Frank Miller, in his official capacity as chief inspector, visited their loft. I received a full report from him later that evening, a professional courtesy. It was a bloodbath of violations. The ungrounded wiring, the lack of fire stops between floors, the unpermitted partition walls creating a maze-like floor plan, and the single point of egress from the sleeping loft. Frank had issued an immediate vacate order. The place was a death trap. They had 48 hours to leave. Chloe's subsequent phone call was not a symphony. It was a screeching, incoherent siren of rage. "This is your fault. You did this. You're trying to ruin us." I let her scream, holding the phone away from my ear. I simply replied, "Chloe, I have no idea what you're talking about. Perhaps you should have hired a licensed contractor." Then I hung up. The first domino had fallen, and it had fallen hard. Their eviction did not deter them. It made them more desperate. They moved into an expensive extended-stay hotel they couldn't afford, which only intensified their need for my money. They doubled down on the competency hearing. Their lawyer sent a new filing, a frivolous elder abuse claim, alleging I was causing them emotional and financial distress with my manipulative behavior. It was a masterpiece of projection, accusing me of the very sins they were committing. I spent the days leading up to the hearing in quiet preparation. I reviewed the audio files from the kitchen smoke detector. I had hours of tape, but I only needed one specific conversation. It was from the day after they were evicted. They had come to my house, unannounced, demanding I help them. They thought I was out. The little device whirred to life as they stood in my kitchen, plotting their next move in venomous whispers. The audio was damning. Marco's voice clear as a bell. Once the judge declares him incompetent, it's over. We get control. We sell this dump in a week, pay off our debts, and sue the city for the loft. We'll say the old man's meddling caused the inspection. And Chloe's reply, colder still. You won't know what hit him. By the time he understands, he'll be in the cheapest nursing home we can find. It was pure, unadulterated malice, captured for posterity. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house, my hand trailing along the walls. I felt Eleanor's presence everywhere, in the worn armchair where she read, in the scent of dried lavender in our bedroom. This house wasn't just brick and mortar. It was the physical manifestation of our life together. It was a living, breathing archive of our love. And I would sooner burn it to the ground myself than let them have it. In the morning, I put on my old dress uniform. The navy blue fabric was heavy with the weight of memory and responsibility. It was a suit of armor. Looking at myself in the mirror, I didn't see a frail old man. I saw Fire Chief Arthur Penson, a man who had faced down infernos, who had made life-or-death decisions in a split second, and who had never, ever backed down from a fight when people's lives were on the line. And my life was on the line. I drove to the county courthouse, the small USB drive containing the audio file feeling heavy in my pocket. I wasn't nervous. I was focused. The same focus I had when arriving on the scene of a 3-story blaze. Assess the structure, identify the weak points, predict the path of destruction, and act decisively. Chloe and Marco were a fire out of control, and I was here to extinguish them permanently. They were already there, huddled with their lawyer, a slick man with a plastic smile. They looked haggard, the stress of their homelessness and mounting debt showing in the lines around their eyes. When they saw me in my uniform, they faltered. Chloe's expression soured. "What are you wearing that for?" she hissed. "Trying to play the hero?" "I am not playing, Chloe," I said, my voice low and even. I walked past them and took my seat, ready for the final confrontation. The hearing room was sterile and cold, all beige walls and cheap wood. It was an anticlimactic setting for the end of a family. Their lawyer began, painting a picture of a doting daughter and a concerned son-in-law, worried sick about a father lost in the fog of senility. He presented Dr. Albright's report. He spoke of my erratic behavior, my isolation, my refusal of their loving help. It was a convincing work of fiction. The judge, a stern woman named Harris with tired eyes, looked over at me. "Mr. Penson," she said, "this is a serious allegation. Your daughter is petitioning for full conservatorship. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" I stood up, my back straight, my uniform lending me a strength I didn't know I still had. "Yes, Your Honor, I do. I have more than a defense. I have the truth, and I have proof." I reached into my breast pocket and produced a small, simple USB drive, holding it between my thumb and forefinger. "Your Honor, my children have painted a picture of a frail, confused old man. A man who is a danger to himself. They are correct on one count. I did perceive a clear and present danger in my own home. But that danger was not a faulty memory or a forgotten stove. It was them." Their lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection, irrelevant and slanderous." The judge silenced him with a raised hand. "Let him speak." I continued, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "You see, Your Honor, before I retired, I was this city's fire chief for 40 years. My entire life has been dedicated to seeing the dangers other people miss. I spot structural weaknesses, faulty wiring, and fire hazards. And I am an expert at spotting greed and deceit. When they began their campaign to have me declared incompetent, I knew it was not out of concern. It was a hostile takeover. So I took a precaution. I upgraded a safety device in my home, a smoke detector in my kitchen. As a fire chief, I know proper placement and function are paramount. This new, fully code-compliant device had an added feature for my security. It recorded audio. It recorded everything. I placed the USB drive on the witness stand. On this drive is a recording from 2 weeks ago. It captures a conversation between my daughter and her husband, taking place in my kitchen when they believed I was not home. It will clarify their motives far better than I ever could. Their lawyer was apoplectic. Objection: illegal recording, invasion of privacy. This is inadmissible. Chloe and Marco were now pale, their confident smirks gone, replaced by masks of dawning terror. Judge Harris looked at me, then at the sputtering lawyer. Mr. Pinson, was this device placed in a private area like a bedroom or bathroom? No, Your Honor. The kitchen, the main common area of my own home. The judge nodded. And it is a functional safety device? Yes, Your Honor. Top of the line. She turned to the lawyer. Objection overruled. In the state of this jurisdiction, a homeowner can record audio in the common areas of their own property. I want to hear it. The clerk plugged the drive into the court's computer. A speaker crackled to life. And then, there it was. Marco's voice, sharp and greedy. Once the judge declares him incompetent, it's over. We get control. We sell this dump in a week. Then, Chloe's voice, laced with a cruelty that made my blood run cold. He won't know what hit him. By the time he understands, he'll be in the cheapest nursing home we can find. A collective gasp went through the small courtroom. Chloe stared at the speaker as if it were a snake, her face a mess of disbelief and horror. That's not... we didn't... She started to stammer, looking wildly at Marco, who was frozen, his face the color of ash. The recording continued for another minute, each word another shovelful of dirt on the grave of their scheme. The raw, unvarnished malice of their plan filled the sterile room, a toxic cloud of their own making. When it was over, a profound silence fell. I looked at the judge. She had taken her glasses off and was rubbing the bridge of her nose. Her expression was no longer tired. It was thunderous. She stared at Chloe and Marco, who both refused to meet her gaze, their eyes fixed on the floor, as if it might swallow them whole. Their entire case, their narrative of loving concern, had been incinerated in 90 seconds. The judge put her glasses back on. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of an avalanche. In my 15 years on this bench, she began, I have seen a great deal of family strife, but I have rarely witnessed such a calculated, malicious, and despicable attempt to defraud this court and exploit a parent for financial gain. You are not caregivers. You are predators. And you have preyed upon a man who has given more to this city than either of you ever will. The petition for conservatorship is dismissed with extreme prejudice, which means you can never file such a motion against your father again. Her gavel cracked down with the finality of a falling tree. That is the least of your concerns. Chloe let out a small, strangled sob. It was the sound of a carefully constructed world crumbling to dust. Furthermore, the judge continued, her eyes boring into them. I am referring this entire case, including the audio evidence and Dr. Albright's highly questionable affidavit, to the district attorney's office for immediate investigation into potential charges of perjury, conspiracy to commit fraud, and felony elder abuse. I would advise you to retain new counsel immediately. Bailiff, please escort them out. That's when the meltdown began. Chloe started screaming, a raw animalistic sound of pure panic. It was his fault. He drove us to this. Marco turned on her, his face contorted in a snarl. You and your stupid startup. It was always your idea. They were at each other's throats, the ugly truth of their partnership exposed under the harsh courtroom lights as the bailiff led them away, their bitter accusations echoing down the hall. I stood there, watching them go. There was no joy in this victory, no triumphant surge, just a profound, aching sadness for the daughter I had lost years ago, and the hollow shells she and her husband had become. I had won, I had saved my home, but I had lost my family. The fire was out, but the smoke would linger for a long time. I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright afternoon sun. I took a deep breath, the first truly clean breath I'd taken in months. The weight on my shoulders, the one I hadn't even fully realized was there, was gone. I got into my old, reliable pickup truck, the one Chloe was always embarrassed by, and drove home. My home, the one I had fought for, the one Eleanor and I had built. The fallout was swift and public. The DA filed charges. Their names and mugshots were in the local news. Their failed wellness company collapsed entirely, and their creditors descended like sharks. They were evicted from their hotel, their luxury car was repossessed, and their so-called friends abandoned them. They had built their life on a foundation of my money and their own arrogance, and now it was all gone. My life, in contrast, became quiet. The silence in the house was no longer oppressive. It was peaceful. I started tackling the projects I'd put off. I cleaned out the attic, sorting through boxes of memories. I found Eleanor's old gardening journals and my first fireman's helmet. I found pictures of a young, smiling Chloe, and for the first time, I could look at them without a fresh wave of pain. I packed them away gently. One day, feeling the house was a little too quiet, I did something Eleanor always wanted to do. I drove to the city animal shelter. I walked past rows of barking, hopeful dogs. I wasn't looking for a puppy. I was looking for a companion who understood what it meant to have the past. In the very last kennel was a scruffy, gray-muzzled terrier mix with the wisest, saddest eyes I'd ever seen. His card said his name was Buster, and he was 10 years old. His owner had passed away. He was quiet, overlooked, and just needed a warm place to land. I knew the feeling. I sat on the floor with him, and he rested his head on my knee. "I'm going to call you Smokey," I told him. He thumped his tail. We went home together. Life found a new rhythm. Early morning walks with Smokey, the cool air crisp in my lungs. Afternoons in the garden, my hands in the soil. Evenings on the porch, reading a book while Smokey snored at my feet. The house felt full again, not with people, but with contentment. It was a simpler life, a quieter one, and it was entirely mine. Then, one Saturday, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find my grandson, Leo, standing on the porch. He was alone, his school backpack slung over his shoulder. He looked smaller than I remembered, his eyes holding a world of confusion. My heart ached for him. He just looked up at me and asked, "Can I come in, Grandpa? I heard you got a dog." I stepped aside and let him in. He didn't mention his parents, and I didn't ask. Smokey trotted over, sniffing his hand, before giving it a gentle lick. Leo knelt and scratched the old dog behind the ears. For a while, that was the only sound in the house. I made him a grilled cheese sandwich and a glass of milk, the universal balm for a 10-year-old's troubles. We sat at the kitchen table, the scene of so much conflict, and it was finally peaceful. We ate in silence. Then, Leo looked at me, his expression serious. "Mom and Dad, they always said you were getting confused, that you couldn't take care of yourself." His voice was small, "But you're not. I think you're the smartest person I know." It wasn't a compliment. It was a discovery, a truth he had found among the wreckage. That was the beginning. Leo started visiting on his own, taking the bus across town. He was living with his other grandparents, he explained. while his parents figured things out. I didn't press for details. Instead, I taught him things. I taught him how to change the oil in my truck, how to properly stack a cord of wood, how to use Eleanor's telescope to find Jupiter on a clear night. I was giving him the anchors of practical knowledge, the things a boy needs to learn to become a capable man. He was giving me a connection to the future, a reason to look forward. Our relationship was being rebuilt, not on the shaky ground of obligation, but on the solid bedrock of mutual respect. It was happening on my terms, in my time, in my house. Chloe and Marco took a plea deal: probation, community service, and court-mandated restitution for the fraudulent claims against me. They lost everything. I heard from a cousin that they had moved to another state, hoping to escape the shame. I felt a brief, hollow ache for the daughter who used to build forts with me in the living room. But that girl was long gone. I had to accept that. Sometimes, I would look at the new smoke detector in the kitchen, a silent guardian. It was designed to alert you to a hidden danger, to the first wisps of smoke before the inferno. In a way, I had become that for myself. I had detected the poison in the air, the slow burn of disrespect turning into the blaze of betrayal, and I had acted before the whole structure of my life came down. I sat on my front porch, Smokey's head resting on my foot. Leo was in the yard, trying to teach the old dog a new trick. The sound of his laughter was the sweetest thing I'd heard in years. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden light over the home I had saved. It was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was full of peace, full of Eleanor's memory, and full of a new, tentative hope. I thought about respect. It wasn't a gift to be given with age. It was a currency earned through a lifetime of actions. And when someone tries to declare you bankrupt, you must be prepared to open the vault and show them exactly what you are worth. My children saw me as a liability, an asset to be liquidated. They failed to see me as a man who knew how things burn. Family, I realized, wasn't just about who shares your blood. It was about who respects your boundaries, who honors your history, and who stands with you when the smoke clears. For me, that was a 10-year-old boy with his mother's eyes and a scruffy old dog who needed a second chance. It wasn't the family I had started with, but it was the family I would finish with. The evening breeze rustled the leaves of the old oak tree, and for a moment, I could almost feel Eleanor's hand on my shoulder, a silent gesture of approval. I had protected our sanctuary. I had honored her memory. I had found a way to live again, not just survive. I was no longer a relic waiting to be discarded. I was Chief Penzin of the Elm Street station. My shift was over, but my watch was not. I was the chief of this house, the chief of my own quiet life, and the guardian of a little boy's future. It was a solemn duty, and I was more than competent to handle it. Justice, I mused, is a bit like a controlled burn. Sometimes you have to set a fire to clear out the underbrush, to destroy the rot and the decay, so that something new and healthy can have a chance to grow in the sunlight. My world had been scorched, but from the ashes, a new life was beginning. Looking at Leo, laughing as Smokey finally rolled over, I smiled. A real smile this time, one that reached my eyes. The past was a memory, the future was an unopened gift, and the present was a peaceful evening on the porch. The alarm had sounded, the danger was past, and all was quiet on the home front. My daughter and her husband had tried to take my last chapter and write a tragic ending for their own profit. They underestimated the author. I had simply taken back the pen and written them out of the story completely. Now a new character had entered, and the tale was much better for it. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and impending rain. Smokey let out a contented sigh and fell asleep. I closed my eyes, listening to the gentle sounds of my world. Finally safe, finally my own. The fire was out, and I was at peace.